Hello everyone, welcome to Project Veritas headquarters in the infamous Wall of Shame. This is Retracto 338. We have a special guest here. CEO of Babylon Bee, Seth Dillon, has obtained a correction from the New York Times. Now usually we do retractions on ourselves, but today this is so special that I'm doing a retracto on somebody else's update. Yeah, they said they changed it from sometimes trafficked information under the guise of satire to a right-leaning satirical site. They inserted the word satirical.
Yeah, they added that in. That was a nice touch.
Cue the Retracto theme song. So in the New York Times article about you, Seth, and about Babylon Bee, the New York Times had reported originally, quote, "But satire kept popping up as a blind spot. In 2019 and 2020, Facebook often dealt with far-right misinformation sites that used satire laser claims to protect their presence on the platform," Mr. Brookings said. For example, and this is the part that they had to update, the Babylon Bee, a right-leaning site, sometimes trafficked in misinformation under the guise of satire. The New York Times was forced to update their article, which reads, quote, "The Babylon Bee, a right-leaning satirical site, has feuded with Facebook and the fact-checking site Snopes over whether the site published misinformation or satire." Seth, you obtained this update and you tweeted this out about the New York Times. Why don't you tell us what happened next?
This story was a story about Facebook having a hard time dealing with satire. Like, irony is difficult for their algorithms to detect, it's difficult for their staff to detect. So sometimes they think things are meant to be deceptive when they're not, they're really just a joke. So they're profiling this liberal satirist, this cartoonist, and how he sometimes gets dinged in error by these algorithms. And they have to keep getting him out of Facebook jail because he keeps getting caught up in their web. So then they start talking about far-right misinformation sites, though, that slip through the cracks. And we are named as the example, the only example, by the way, of far-right misinformation sites that slip through the cracks. And that's where that statement comes in where he says, that we trafficked in misinformation. Basically, what they're accusing us of is pretending to be a satire site. We're not actually a satire site.
Pretending to be one.
Yes, yeah.
Satire.
Fake satire.
Quote, satire.
Laser.
And there was a series of tweets, of threads that occurred. Take the audience through what happened next.
Yeah, so this was a thread that I put up in response once I first saw this article and I saw how they were mischaracterizing us. I'm like, okay, we got to make some noise about this. We need people to be aware of what's being done here. To be accused of deceiving people on purpose under the guise of satire, that's serious because the social networks will take us down for that. But that's not what we're doing, so we have to make sure that everybody knows that's not what we're doing. So I come out and make a statement about this. I say, in an article about Facebook's difficulty in dealing with satire, the New York Times points to Babylon Bee as an example of a far-right misinformation site that sometimes trafficked in misinformation under the guise of satire.
So Seth, you do a thread on Twitter underneath your post about this, and you say some things. What do you say in your tweet thread that eventually forces Mike Isaac, the technology reporter, to respond?
So you'd think if you're going to make a claim like there's a bunch of far-right misinformation sites that have slipped through the cracks, okay, name some of them. What are they? And they say, for example, the Babylon Bee, ... and then go on to talk about us. We're the only example they cite. I find that kind of crazy because, we're not a far-right misinformation site, and we're the only one they mention. It's just bizarre. So I call him out on that, and then I walk through how he's got the words trafficked and misinformation hyperlinked. Now, when you hyperlink words like that, that's a pretty serious claim. It's a serious allegation about us. So you look at words like that, they're hyperlinked, you think, okay, let's click on that link and see where it takes you. It takes you to this New York Times piece. It's like this profile of the Babylon Bee. And in the profile of the Babylon Bee, it actually talks about how we're a conservative satire site. It doesn't call us a misinformation site. It doesn't even come close to calling us a far-right misinformation site. And they actually cite examples of times that we'd been fact-checked for obvious satire. So they're noting in the piece that they link to that we're obvious satire. But that is their source to prove that we traffic in misinformation. So I'm calling them out on that in this thread too and saying, look, you would expect a supportive source, but this, far from supporting the claim that they're making, it's actually refuting it.
You also mentioned the New York Times lawsuit in that thread.
The irony in all of this, the crazy irony is, that the New York Times is using misinformation to smear us as being a source of misinformation. And I know you deal with that all the time. So I throw in a link to the story, about the Supreme Court judge ruling that the New York Times was actually using deceptive disinformation against you guys to show we're not the only ones dealing with this.
Defendants argue that their statements describing Veritas video as deceptive, false, and without evidence were mere opinion incapable of being judged true or false. However, if a writer interjects an opinion in a news article and will seek to claim legal protections as opinion, it stands to reason that the writers should have an obligation to alert the reader that it is opinion. The articles that are the subject of this action called the video, quote, deceptive, but the dictionary definitions of, quote, disinformation and deceptive provided by defendants' counsel certainly apply to Astor's and Shu's failure to note that they injected their opinions in news articles, as they now claim.
The New York Times has a habit of doing this. They are the ones deceiving people, and we're just getting caught up in the same type of methodology that they're using against you.
Why do you think that Mike Isaac was compelled to update the article?
Well, he was getting a lot of mentions on Twitter. He's getting tagged all the time saying, Mike, what is this? This is garbage. This is nonsense.
And we have some of those comments after he did the update. What were people saying?
Yeah, we have people like Andrew Bain is saying, imagine being a journalist writing a hit piece on an obvious satire site, tagging Mike Isaac. Dude literally has a screen grab from The Onion on his timeline. So, they're basically saying, look, he's friendly to The Onion, but yet here he is attacking the Babylon Bee. Hardly excuses your outright dishonesty. I won't hold my breath waiting for the New York Times to accuse, say, Trevor Noah or Weekend Update on SNL as, quote, misinformation. He had people coming at him from all angles, felt compelled, I think, to make a statement and actually, revise it because it was going nowhere good really quickly.
So this happens, and now we have, the frame of Mike Isaac, all known on Twitter through the nom de plume Rat King. His words, not mine.
And he calls you Imam, forgive me, his words, not mine.
If you want to get into the update, was not exactly a retraction in the sense where they say, oh, what we said was false, and we're sorry we said something false. That's not what happened here. So they throw in this new sentence about how we feuded with Facebook and the fact-checking site Snopes over whether we published misinformation or satire. So what they're saying is, in a paragraph, one paragraph that talks about far-right misinformation sites, we're still the only one mentioned. And instead of saying that we trafficked in misinformation, they're saying we're in a feud with Snopes and Facebook about whether we are in misinformation. That's false too. And if you actually click through this link, check the fact-checking site Snopes. Those words are hyperlinked.
Where does that hyperlink take you?
It takes you to a Snopes fact check of one of our articles.
It takes you to a headline about Georgia lawmaker claiming a Chick-fil-A employee or something like that?
Okay. Yeah. We went after Snopes for basically smearing us with that fact check. Snopes backed off and put an editor's note. Let me read you the editor's note that currently appears on the fact check that they are now linking to as further support for this feud. Editor's note, some readers interpreted wording in a previous version of this fact check as imputing deceptive intent on the part of the Babylon Bee in its original satirical piece about Georgia State Representative Erica Thomas. And that was not the editor's aim. To address any confusion, we have revised some of the wording, mostly for tone and clarity. We are in the process of pioneering industry standards for how the fact-checking industry should best address humor and satire. So they walk back the suggestion that we're deceptive in an editor's note.
What are your thoughts on a possible defamation lawsuit against the New York Times?
What they said was clearly false, and like I said, they're using misinformation to smear us as a source of misinformation. We do satire. I like to keep things light. I like to make jokes about things. I want to make people laugh. So to be having these serious conversations about defamation lawsuits, it's almost uncomfortable for me. I don't want to be dealing with this. At the same time, it's our business to do satire. And in order to stay on the social networks like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, we can't have these lies sticking. This narrative can't stick to us. If they can get it to stick to us, we're done. As much as we want to just have fun with this and mock them mercilessly, and we do, we write satirical pieces about them, at the same time, it's like we do have to actually stand up to this and rebut it in a very serious way.
All of this, Seth, I think could have been avoided if Mike Isaac, the technology reporter at the New York Times, just did his job, or Mike Isaac, a.k.a. Rat King.